It all began one cold November afternoon. Powerful wind whipped the fallen leaves on Bannerman Road into the air. Winter lurked in the wings, ready to sink its icy claws into the world. Some people find this time of year difficult or even depressing as the evenings draw in. I prefer to think of the nice things in store. Christmas, for instance. Trips into central London for shopping, before holing up in a warm cafe with all my bags, cradling a strong restorative cup of tea. Or Clyde, pelting all and sundry with snowballs, before I firmly suggest he channels all that boundless energy into building a snowman instead. In anticipation of the colder climate, I settled into the attic's comfiest chair with a mug of hot chocolate. "Mr. Smith, I need you," I said, triggering a transformation which I had almost come to take for granted. Steam hissed from the chimney breast as the whole thing pulled into 3 parts, revealing Mr. Smith, my alien supercomputer. He seemed a touch miffed, however, when I only asked him to play a few Christmassy tunes from his vast media archive. Yes, I know it was a bit premature to listen to that stuff, but I was in the mood. My attic, my rules. Of course, this kind of cosy bliss couldn't last for long. And it wouldn't. Oh, no. Bannerman Road was about to be attacked. Not from the skies this time, but through cables, phone lines, and wireless routers. I almost spilt my hot chocolate as Mr. Smith froze his playback of Jingle Bells. The soft focus holly and tinsel on his screen was suddenly replaced with a street map, which centred on Bannerman Road. His gentlemanly tone sounded more urgent than usual. "Apologies, Sarah Jane, but we appear to have a dangerous situation in close proximity." "How dangerous and how close?" I asked. "Potentially very dangerous," he replied. "And just a few doors away from this house. I'm still trying to ascertain where." Without hesitation, I grabbed my mobile phone to call Clyde and Rani. While waiting for them to pick up, I ran down the stairs to the bedroom door of my son, Luke, and called for him to join me in the attic. I was fortunate that school had finished for the day, and all 3 had only just got back to Bannerman Road. 2 minutes later, Clyde and Rani were breathless as they bolted in through my attic door. "Where's the fire?" Clyde said, ready for action. These kids were seriously speedy. "Now will you tell us what's going on, Mum?" Luke pleaded. "Well," I said, "I'm not entirely sure myself. Mr. Smith, what's the latest?" The kids were all ears as the computer spoke. "Hello, everyone. I have detected abnormal local internet activity." Clyde piped up. "You sure that isn't just Luke, looking at his boring research materials?" He then winced as Rani playfully punched his arm. "Hey," Luke protested. "What's boring about fractal geometry?" Rani piped up. "Well, at least Luke isn't chasing after some girl from the netball team who won't even give him the time of day." An embarrassed Clyde turned on the bluster. "Sonia secretly loves me, guys." "Yes," Rani said with a grin, "and she's keeping that secret really, really well." Mr. Smith made a timely interjection. "If I might be allowed to brief you. Something potentially dangerous and quite possibly alien is downloading into 2 personal computers on this street." The street map on Mr. Smith's screen vanished and was replaced by 2 video feeds, side by side. They were low-resolution images of an elderly woman and a young boy aged about 10. Both people were seen close up, facing the camera, and apparently sitting on chairs. The sounds of typing suggested that they were working at computers. Various ornaments lined a mantelpiece behind the woman, while a wall over the boy's shoulder was covered with posters of footballers. "These are live images from the webcams of 2 Bannerman Road residents," Mr. Smith said. "Wow," Clyde said. "You can access people's webcams. You're worse than the government." "No, Clyde," Mr. Smith said patiently. "I issued video chat requests to each user, which they accepted." "Oh," Clyde said. "Fair enough. So they can see us too?" "Yes," came the reply. "However, I'm having trouble with establishing an audio link due to some kind of encryption barrier." Each of the people seemed to be peering right at us, The boy waved cheerily, while the woman just looked bemused and awkward. "Everyone smile," I said without moving my lips. "Do you recognise them?" Clyde scratched his head. I've seen the kid around. Don't know where he lives, though." Luke addressed Mr. Smith again. "In what way could these people's downloads be dangerous?" "Both files consist of exactly the same malicious code, Luke, denoting a computer virus. However, analysis reveals that it has over 50 times the destructive capability of any virus currently in circulation on this planet." I didn't like the sound of that at all. "Right," I said. "What are their door numbers?" "The encryption barrier is making it very difficult for me to zero in on a physical address for either of them. In the meantime, it may be useful to learn their recent internet history." The boy was playing an online football game, while the woman was looking at a speed dating site. Clyde grinned broadly at this. "The saucy thing!" As Mr. Smith continued, his screen image changed again, now showing 2 columns of computer screen text against a white background. "Both residents are engaged in these online chats. It may help to take a look." While it felt a bit intrusive to do so, the apparent seriousness of this situation forced me to read the conversations, which updated themselves every few seconds with the next piece of chat, accompanied by a ping. We moved closer to the screen in order to take it all in. The boy's username, Super Ollie, suggested his real name was Ollie. Sadly, the woman's username was the less useful, Old-Time Girl. Her own conversation was seemingly with a man of around her own age. I knew this because a cartoon image of his face perched at the top of the chat window. He had initiated the conversation by remarking how cold it was outside, before they went on to discuss the weather and childhood recollections of the Second World War. Glancing over to Ollie's conversation, I noticed that his chat partner was a kid also of a similar age. Again, the stranger's likeness was represented by a cartoon image, and, far more suspiciously, he had started their conversation about football by remarking about the cold, using the exact same phrase. Ollie replied that he had cancelled football with his mates tonight because it was too chilly. "It looks as though they're talking to the same person," Luke said. "Which means this person can't be an old man and a young boy." Rani strode up to the screen like a schoolteacher approaching a blackboard. "Look at this," she said, pointing from one part of the woman's chat window to another on Ollie's. "Our mystery chatterbox offered them both a download link, here and here." "Yes," Luke said. "And the downloads were sold to them as different things which they'd each be interested in. Ollie was offered a computer program which keeps track of football scores, and with the woman, it was supposed to be something to connect local people of her age." "Then they accepted by clicking the links," Clyde said, shaking his head. "Pretty dumb." "Mr. Smith," Luke said, "what are the chances of this virus being alien?" "Insufficient data, Luke." "No matter where it's from," I said, "we need to act fast. If we have to, we'll go to every single house." "Let's do it," Rani cried, as she and Clyde ran for the attic door. They skidded to a halt as Mr. Smith spoke again. "Sarah Jane, I'm afraid the woman's download is complete. Drastic changes are occurring inside her computer. I have established potential audio links to both webcams, but the house numbers remain elusive." "Oh no," I said. "Open her audio link." Mr. Smith showed us the 2 screens of live webcam footage once again. As the words "audio link established" flashed on the woman's video feed, a terrible screech made her drop the teacup from which she'd been sipping. It was the sound of metal being twisted and bent, accompanied by malicious laughter. She stared at her computer, transfixed by fear, then unsteadily rose to her feet. I felt so frustrated, not being able to properly see what was happening. "Hello?" I said. "Hello? Can you hear me?" The woman on the screen showed no signs of having heard my voice. She was backing away from the webcam, startled, as the laughter and the terrible grinding noise continued. By contrast, in the video feed beside her, Ollie was still happily chatting away to his enigmatic new friend. In the background, his mum entered the room carrying a tea tray. Remembering the 2 online chats, it struck me that the woman had clicked on her download link a few minutes before Ollie, which probably explained why this was happening to her first. "Hello," I said again, waving at the woman. "Look, here I am. Can you hear me now, as well as see me?" The woman looked confused. I wasn't surprised, seeing as I'd added a new unexpected noise to what looked like her living room. "Yes, dear, just about," she said, looking really uncertain and afraid. "What's your name?" I asked. "Doris, dear. Who are you?" "My name's Sarah Jane," I said. "I want to help you. What's happening to your computer?" The sound of splitting metal worsened, reaching a terrible peak as Doris replied, raising her voice above the din. "Oh, my goodness! Something's coming out of it!" The Sarah Jane Adventures, Deadly Download by Jason Arnopp. Read by Elisabeth Sladen. "Doris," I said to the terrified old woman on Mr. Smith's screen, "please stay calm and tell me which door number you live at. We'll come over and help you." "It's breaking open," she wailed. A sudden crack noise made Doris jump and stare at her computer, petrified. Then something truly bizarre happened. The video feed's point of view began to lift upwards. Doris's webcam seemed to be floating in the air. "Doris," I persisted, "please tell me your door number. You must tell me." 54, she gasped, heading for the living room door as fast as her poor legs would carry her. The webcam seemed to follow, looking down at her from mid-air. Doris cried out in terror as the video feed broke and was replaced with static. Luke and I turned to the attic door and saw exactly what we expected to see. Nothing and no one. Rani and Clyde had heard the door number and were already on the case, running down the stairs. I immediately asked Mr. Smith to open the audio link to Ollie's computer. The boy was now alternating between typing into the chat window on his screen and making himself chew mouthfuls of salad, for which he clearly had no enthusiasm. "How long until Ollie's download is complete?" I asked. 3 minutes and 4 seconds, Sarah Jane. "Hello, Ollie," I said. The sudden burst of sound almost made him spit out his salad. "I'm Sarah Jane, and this is my son Luke. This is going to sound really weird, but you have to evacuate your house." For a moment, he had a sparkle of amazed excitement in his eyes. Who are you two?" he said, staring into his webcam. "Am I on TV?" "I'm afraid not," I told him. "This is very serious. You see, that download you accepted may well damage your computer and—" I had to improvise here to make things sound vaguely plausible. "Make it explode. The whole house could go up, so please evacuate. My son and I will meet you in the street in 30 seconds. "Are you guys for real?" he frowned with a disbelieving smirk. "Please," Luke said. "There's no time to lose. Get out!" Once the confused-looking boy had left his bedroom, Luke and I grabbed our jackets, then made a beeline for the attic door. Mr. Smith's voice chimed out behind us. "Ollie's download will be complete in 2 minutes and 28 seconds. Clyde later told me that he and Rani arrived at Doris's front door only to find it firmly locked. Luckily, her back garden was accessible via a side passage, and when they reached it, the door was open. Knowing that they might have to go on the defensive, the pair armed themselves with implements from Doris's kitchen. Rani grabbed a frying pan, while Clyde snatched a flour-coated rolling pin from a work surface. They ran through a door into Doris's living room and saw her computer desk. The casing of her computer's tower now sat in 2 halves, like a mass of wires and gadgetry in a big open mouth. Before they could take a proper look at it, their attention was distracted by a series of electronic beeps and an alarmed cry from the hallway. Ducking out of the living room through a second door, they saw poor old Doris hobbling along the hall away from them towards the front door. Something airborne was chasing her. It resembled a large insect, at least 3 inches long, a locust but made of metal. The thing hovered a few feet above Doris's head, suspended by 2 violently flapping wings. "Afternoon, Doris," said Clyde behind her. "You have got to start locking that back door." Doris and the hovering metal locust both turned around, trying to locate the source of the voice. Doris seemed to recognise Clyde and Rani, probably from having seen them in the neighbourhood. 2 red lights like eyes illuminated on the front of the metal beast. One of them was part of a webcam built into the robot's head. "Don't worry, Doris," Clyde said. "We're on it." He then stepped back rather nervously as the metal locust fluttered towards them. Rani stepped in front of Clyde and shouted at the fast-approaching creature. "Dinner is served," she said, hefting her frying pan. "Come and get it!" Doris watched, completely bewildered by these goings-on, as the locust dived at Rani, who quickly raised her pan. There was an almighty clang as the pan and locust collided. The thing made a distorted, electronic howl as it bounded off a nearby wall, then went skimming into Doris's front room. Luke and I ran along Bannerman Road towards Ollie and his mum, who I learned was called Trish during our hurried introduction. Ollie looked quite excited by having to leave the house, whereas Trish was rather cross. Blocking our path to her front door, she demanded to know what was going on. Before I could answer, Ollie spoke up. "I told you, Mum. This lady said the computer was going to explode." Trish frowned, looking me up and down rather rudely. "What did I tell you, Ollie?" she said, "about not just trusting any complete stranger on the internet. These people could be anyone. Oh, they could be about to rob us." "I quite agree about the internet," I told Trish, "but I assure you we're not after your silver candlesticks." "How do you know we've got candlesticks?" Trish said, looking even more suspicious. Oh dear, I really hadn't helped with that comment. "We live at number 13, Luke added with his most innocent smile. He pointed to his school uniform. "I go to school here." Trish shook her head. "No, you ain't coming in." Suddenly, we all heard the terrible sound of grinding metal from inside the house, accompanied by distorted evil laughter. "That's coming from your computer," I told Ollie, then appealed to Trish. "Please, let us in. We can help." He and Trish both looked worried by the awful racket. Trish reluctantly nodded and stepped aside, allowing us to run through the front door. When Luke and I entered Ollie's room, our focus immediately fixed on the large open laptop on his desk. A metallic screech filled the air, emanating from the machine. The cartoon face of the boy Ollie had been chatting with now filled the entire screen. No longer smiling, the face was laughing malevolently. A bulge forced its way up through the laptop's keyboard. We both flinched as the keyboard violently erupted. I shielded Luke's eyes as sparks and broken keys flew everywhere. When I removed my hands, we both watched in nervous awe as a robot locust rose from the hole in Ollie's ruined laptop, its wings a blur at either side of it. The creature's red eyes lit up and it began to beep while flying towards us. Now, where did that come from? Luke wondered, his eyes nervously fixed on the thing as we slowly backed out of the room. I didn't answer, partly because I had no idea, but also because I was too busy weighing up the robot's erratic movements as it followed us onto the landing. Trish's voice floated up from the foot of the stairs. "What's going on up there?" Luke turned and called down from over the staircase. "Please, stay out of the house," he said. When he returned to my side, I was clutching a vase of flowers as the metallic menace circled overhead, preparing to take a nosedive at us. "What's with the flowers?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "Are you thinking along the lines of bees liking them? Looks like more of a locust to me." I shook my head. More along the lines of electronic things not liking this. I yanked the flowers from the vase, then slung the water at the locust. The robot sparked and smoked as the water struck it, and it fell to the ground like a lead weight. Its wings, which we could now see were constructed from circuit boards, flapped feebly. Then it stiffened and was still. Luke saw that familiar look of remorse on my face. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Mum, It's not a real living thing. It's some kind of machine." "Yes, I know," I said. "I know." Meanwhile, at number 54, as I later discovered, Clyde and Rani had banished Doris to the relative safety of her kitchen, having explained who they were and suggesting that she lock herself in. And now a locust hunt was underway. After the locust ricocheted off the wall into the front room, it had vanished entirely. Rani nervously gripped her frying pan as she and Clyde cautiously made their way into the silent room. It was simply furnished: one long sofa with 3 cushions, an old-fashioned chunky television set, a book cabinet and some shelves holding videotapes, and the odd DVD. "You're pretty mean when you're armed with a kitchen implement," Clyde told her. "I'd hate to see what you could do with a cheese grater." Rani raised a finger to her lips, signalling for him to shush. She slowly lifted a cushion from the sofa, her pan ready to strike. There was nothing hiding behind the cushion, which she tossed aside, accidentally hitting Clyde in the face. "Loving your work," he said, shrugging it off and examining the video shelves. Rani lifted the second cushion. Nothing under that one either. "Third time lucky," she murmured. Rani gingerly took hold of the last cushion by one corner, held her breath, then swung it away from the sofa. Nothing. In a blur of movement, she whipped the square seat cushions away too. There was no sign of the locust. Rani turned to Clyde. "No luck?" she asked. Clyde was looking at the room's windows. One of the top panels was hinged wide open. He shrugged at Rani. "Looks like it flew the coop." Rani grimaced. Like me, she refused to be beaten. "Could he just snuck back out of the room into the hall?" she pondered. "I'm thinking no," he said. "But me and my scary rolling pin of doom will check it out." He ducked out of the room, leaving Rani to examine the book cabinet. She opened its 2 glass doors, knowing she was silly for doing so, as there was no way the thing could have got inside. Still, she liked to be thorough. As she ran her eyes over Doris's book collection, she smiled as she recognised a book which her mum, Geeta, owned. Embarrassing romantic stuff. Then she heard a low beep. She gasped as she turned in time to see the locust flying out from behind the sofa and heading straight for her, fast. Before she could do anything to stop the robot, it had scurried up her sleeve. Knowing she could hardly hit herself with the frying pan, she tossed it aside with a clatter. "Clyde! Clyde!" She heard Clyde yelling back from the other side of the house, asking her what was wrong. He was getting closer, calling her name, but Rani couldn't reply. She felt as though her real self was being pushed to the back of her own mind as an alien intelligence took control. Clyde dashed into the front room, ready to do battle. He was surprised to find Rani standing calmly by the book cabinet, closing its doors. "What's up?" he said, confused. "You're okay? Why all this shouting?" Rani shrugged. "Oh, that! Sorry, I'm fine. I just need your help to push this cabinet aside. Let's make sure the robot isn't hiding behind it." Clyde shook his head in consternation as he walked over to help her. Out on Bannerman Road, Ollie was asking his mum if she'd kept the receipt for his laptop and could take it back to the shop for a replacement. Trish was demanding to know what Luke had hidden under his jumper, clearly believing we'd stolen something from her house. I tried to keep her calm, but was immensely relieved when Clyde and Rani ran down the street from Doris's house and joined us. We made our excuses and left, leaving Trish distinctly unimpressed. Little did she know that we'd just saved her from, well, whatever the locust was. Clyde and Rani were carrying the remains of Doris's ruptured computer, which the poor woman had insisted on them taking away. Apparently, she simply couldn't bear for it to be in her house any longer. Clyde assured me that Doris was fine, recovering in her living room with a nice cup of Earl Grey. Nevertheless, I made a mental note to go and visit her for tea and sympathy just as soon as I could. As the 4 of us made our way back to number 13, we wasted no time in swapping stories. Clyde was impressed when Luke produced the deactivated locust, but I could see he also felt he'd let us down by allowing his and Rani's quarry to escape. As for Rani, well, she was talking with little of her usual zest. On reflection, I should have noticed she wasn't quite there. But teenagers can be very hard to read and quite changeable. Not for the first time, I wondered whatever we might do without Mr. Smith. Upon our return to the attic, I placed the lifeless robot locust onto his scanner tray, feeling the throb of power as he brought his incredible knowledge to bear on it. We'd soon find out what kind of alien this thing was. From my own casual inspection, though, I didn't get the impression that it was very high-tech. Quite the opposite, in fact. The robot's mechanisms appeared remarkably crude. It seemed to me that it didn't resemble an alien at all. We all sat exchanging theories about what this locust might be. Luke, bless his heart, had made a big plate of hot buttered toast for us all to wolf down as we worked, but I couldn't bring myself to touch any. That's typical of me. When there's a mystery to be solved, I can't settle until I know some answers. Once again, Rani seemed rather out of sorts. I waited for a moment to catch her eye, then mouthed, "Are you all right?" She nodded and smiled, but there was something odd about her, something I couldn't quite pin down. She produced her mobile phone. "I'd better call Mum and Dad. Won't be long." With that, she nipped out of the attic onto the landing to make her call. This struck me as peculiar, because Rani would usually have no qualms about calling her parents right in front of us. "What do you think, Mum?" Luke said. "Is this an invasion of Earth through the internet?" "Seems likely," I said. "And if that's the case, how many more of these home invasions could happen at any minute?" My own question hung in the air. It chilled me. I wondered what these robots would have done to Doris and Ollie if we hadn't stopped them. Did they have the capacity to injure or even kill? Rani later told me that she had no control at all over herself as she spoke into her mobile phone out on the landing. She remembered hearing herself speak completely against her will, and her voice sounded quite unlike her. It was low, monotone, and almost robotic. "His name is Clyde Langer," she said into her phone. "Her name is Sonia Parks. He has an attraction for her which can be used to our advantage." She listened for a moment as the person spoke on the other end of the line, then continued. "Yes, Mr. Webster. Here is his mobile phone number." Back in the attic, the words "Analysis complete" were flashing on Mr. Smith's monitor. "Sarah Jane," he announced just for good measure. "The results are in." "Good, good," I said, practically springing across the room to him. Rani opened the door to the attic after finishing her call on the landing. "Come on in," I said. "Mr. Smith has more to tell us." She shook her head, remaining in the doorway. "I'm not feeling so well. I need some fresh air." "Okay, just be careful in case any more of these locusts are flying around." Rani nodded. Concerned, I watched her head downstairs for a moment before Clyde wrestled my attention back to the attic. "Come on, Sarah Jane. The suspense is doing my head in. Let's have it, Mr. Smith." "Thank you, Clyde. The device which you gave me to scan is not of extraterrestrial origin. It is derived solely from Earth technology." The words took a while to sink in. Then Clyde broke the silence. "So maybe these things didn't download at all. Maybe they were put inside the machines by the manufacturer. Were the PC and laptop the same make?" We compared the details on Doris's ruined PC with Luke's recollection of Ollie's laptop and found that they had different manufacturers. "Okay," I said. "So where did these locusts come from?" Luke drew his legs up in front of him on the couch, thinking hard. "It's impossible for a physical object to download through the internet," he considered. "All that can come through the internet is numbers. It's all zeros and ones, processed into sounds and images." Clyde looked impatient. "Uh-huh. So?" "I don't know," Luke said, deflated. I felt much the same, until Mr. Smith's smooth tones filled our ears once again. "Sarah Jane, if I might contribute further." I slapped a hand on my forehead. "Mr. Smith, I'm so sorry. We ran away with ourselves there." "Apology accepted," Mr. Smith said. However, if you had allowed me to continue to deliver my results, I would have told you what the locust device consists of. Go on, I said, clamping my mouth shut and swapping amused glances with Luke and Clyde. Mr. Smith was in a mood with us. He could be a touch petulant when he wanted to be. Then again, I always like a bit of gumption in my computerized companions. The device, Mr. Smith said, is comprised of various components from Ollie's laptop. Then how about this, Luke said. What if the idea of a robot locust was downloaded? Clyde nodded. Like a blueprint? Exactly, said Luke. Then the blueprint physically created itself using the inner workings of whichever computer it had downloaded to. Like an active computer virus, I said. A very active computer virus indeed. As we continued to discuss this idea, Clyde was distracted by the arrival of a text. He pulled out his mobile phone, thinking that this had better be really good to justify his attention right now. He glanced at his screen, then did a double take. It was a text from Sonia at school. He'd sent her a few texts over the last couple of months. Not too often. He didn't want to seem like a stalker or anything, but he did really like her. She seemed to share his musical tastes and had a wicked smile. He would later admit to me that Sonia's one and only reply had been indifferent at best, and only a 3 or 4 word answer. This text was different. Attic conversation faded into the background as Clyde studied the words, even blinking a few times to make sure he wasn't totally imagining things. Sonia wanted to go to the cinema with him. She had even attached a download link for a list of films which were playing at the local. He knew he shouldn't seem too eager, but he had to download the file so that he could choose a film and reply to Sonia. Bit worried about Ronnie, he suddenly said, making the rest of us fall silent for a moment. Just going to go and check on her? As Clyde quickly left the attic, I smiled reassuringly at a slightly baffled Luke. Privately, however, I was worried that our team were drifting away when we needed all hands on deck. Luke, Mr. Smith and I could obviously whip up a real brainstorm together, but it was never quite the same without all 5 minds to jointly work things out and make the right decisions. Clyde found Rani standing on the driveway outside my house. She was staring vacantly at the front door, but when she saw him, the personality flooded back into her face. You okay? He asked, distracted as he pressed a button on his phone to download the list of cinema films. We were all a bit worried about you. I'm fine, Rani said. You just concentrate on that text from Sonia. Clyde pulled an indignant face. How'd you know about that? Rani only smiled as the words, download complete, appeared on Clyde's phone. Suddenly, there was a sound of grinding, ripping metal. Clyde looked down with surprise to see the mobile phone in his hand warp and transform. What's going on? He said. He tried to throw the phone away, but 2 bands of twisting, curling metal had grabbed his fingers. Scared now, he repeated the question more urgently to Rani. She smiled at him. You're joining Webster's Puppet Kingdom and will dance to his tune. There's nothing you can do to fight it. Clyde opened his mouth, clearly about to shout for help. Before he could get even the first syllable out, however, Rani had darted behind him and covered his mouth with one of her hands. Clyde struggled against her in vain, while watching his phone continue to change into an all-too-familiar shape. It had become Small Locust. Clyde stared with a terrible fascination at its complex array of metal and plastic parts. They included his phone's tiny speakers, microphones, screws, wires, battery, and numerous microchips. The locust's wings whirred as it fluttered up his sleeve. Up in the attic, Mr. Smith was pooling all his resources into a scan of the neighbourhood. 58 other home invasions have occurred, he told Luke and I, and continue to occur. Unfortunately, the sheer number of them mean I am unable to be precise in citing their locations, other than to say that Bannerman Road and the surrounding streets are the most heavily affected. Could we send emails across the neighbourhood? Luke suggested, warning them not to accept the downloads. Great idea, I said. Let's just hope people pay attention and don't think it's junk mail. Sending the emails now, Mr. Smith said. But for the 58 and counting people who have already accepted, it is too late. A whole array of local CCTV images appeared on Mr. Smith's screen. Luke and I were appalled as we watched the madness unfurling before us. A man fled out through his front door onto Carlton Road with a twin daughter tucked under each arm. As he charged down his drive, a steel locust flew out of the house in hot pursuit. We saw another poor man running along Caraway Crescent, his whole body covered with locusts. I'd often seen him carrying old computer equipment from his car boot to his front door. He had to be a technical enthusiast, and now, I guessed, he was paying a high price for pursuing his hobby as every computer in his house broke open, unleashing a locust. Luke and I watched as he suddenly stood very still on the pavement, blank-faced, as if awaiting instructions. As we helplessly watched chaos claiming the neighbourhood, Mr. Smith kept us updated on local 999 calls. He played us one which had been made by a woman on Lawson Road. "I need the police," she said breathlessly. "My new tablet computer arrived this morning. A lady online offered me an application which tracks stocks and shares, and I stupidly downloaded it. And now the machine's gone mad. It broke in half, turned into a monster, and chased me around the house, but I actually think it's gone now. Maybe I'm..." The phone call suddenly ended with her scream, accompanied by familiar electronic beeps. Other CCTV screens revealed that the madness had reached the nearby high street. There was a commotion at a bus stop, as one man's Bluetooth headset transformed into a locust and crawled down the back of his shirt. As fellow pedestrians backed away from him, others flooded out of a nearby internet cafe, chased by locusts. Turning to the attic window, Luke and I saw blank-faced people joining each other on the streets, all across the neighbourhood. They all headed off together down the street. Luke tore his gaze away from the eerie sights. "What are we going to do, Mum? Should we just try and save as many people as we can?" I clicked my fingers as it struck me. Oh, this should have been obvious. "When a bath's overflowing," I asked him, "what's the first thing you do? Get a row of buckets to try and catch the water?" He shook his head. He turned the taps off. "Exactly," I said, "and that's what we need to focus on." Mr. Smith spoke. "I should warn you, Sarah Jane, that even I do not have the power to turn off the internet." "I know, Mr. Smith, but that's not what I need you to do. I need you to pinpoint the true source of these downloads." "Analysing now," he replied. As Mr. Smith set to work, I was pleased to see Rani and Clyde rejoin us. "How are you feeling?" Luke asked Rani. She smiled. "Much better, thanks." "What's Mr. Smith analysing now?" Clyde wondered. I was about to answer, but then stopped myself. A funny feeling was nagging at me. These two might have looked like Rani and Clyde, and they might have been talking vaguely like them, but they weren't quite the people we knew. They were decent impersonators. People who had the look down pat but could never hope to replicate the body language or the unique way in which a person's soul beams out through their eyes. "Mum?" Luke said, wondering why I suddenly looked distant. Not wanting to betray my suspicions, I just said something about how I'd been miles away. I discreetly turned away from Rani and Clyde and activated my wrist scanner, which looked like an ordinary watch but could detect non-human entities. "What are you planning to do, Sarah Jane?" Rani asked with a menacing edge to her voice. I glanced at my wrist scanner, confirming my suspicions. "That's classified information," I said, turning to face them. "I know the truth now. You're both under some kind of external control. You have to shake it off." Rani and Clyde stiffened, dropping their pretense. Luke looked surprised. He may have been my beautiful, hugely intelligent son, but sometimes he was oblivious to the subtleties of human behaviour. "Sarah Jane," Mr. Smith announced, "while I can confirm that your scan results are correct, I should add that both Clyde and Rani are receiving a signal via the locust devices hidden about their persons. Clyde and Rani backed away from us, heading for the door. Clyde pointed at us from across the room. "Webster's puppet kingdom cannot be stopped," he ordered. "You will end this investigation now." I puffed myself up, hands on hips, elbows out. "Or what, exactly?" "Or," Rani said, looking frighteningly intense, "you will become one with the Humulgus." And with that ominous prediction, they were gone. Luke and I remained silent for a while as their descending footsteps resounded through the house, then faded altogether. Luke raised an eyebrow. "Become one with the Humulgus?" he said. "That doesn't sound good." "Sarah Jane," Mr. Smith said, "I have anticipated your next question and searched for the word Humulgus. There are no established records of such a species." Luke and I looked at each other. So what did it all mean? I wasn't sure yet, but at least Clyde had inadvertently given us a new lead. "Never mind Humulgus for now, Mr. Smith," I said. "I'd say the name Webster might help your search for the source of these downloads." As Mr. Smith's hunt continued, the next half hour seemed to crawl by. I was absolutely itching to get out there, into the streets, and make a difference. My number one priority was to free Clyde, Rani, and every other victim from this terrible mind control. "Sarah Jane," Mr. Smith finally said, "I have located the source of the downloads. The person responsible is Ian Webster." "Who's he?" Luke asked. "He is head of information technology at the corporate company Stone and Parsons. To be more precise, he is the information technology department." "An IT guy," Luke said. "That makes sense. He obviously knows his computers." I felt a familiar charge of excitement, the satisfaction of peeling back the layers of secrecy to find out exactly what was happening. We admittedly had no idea of why this was happening, but Ian Webster's name and location would do for now. "Stone and Parsons is a local company," Mr. Smith added. "Their working day ends in 1 hour. "Then let's get there fast," I said. "Maps, Mr. Smith, maps! Bring on the maps, including a schematic diagram of that building." The Stone and Parsons building presented an impressively corporate face to the world. It was a flashy office block, all steel and glass. 5 stories tall, it towered over the surrounding leafy green suburb. Beneath the building was a basement. This subterranean level was the domain of the company's IT chief, Ian Webster. Webster's office resembled nothing more than a big den. Framed film posters hung crooked. One entire wall was haphazardly plastered with pictures of science fiction aliens. Various action figures lined a couple of shelves. The rubbish bin had clearly become full some time ago, forcing the 30-year-old to use the floor instead. The decoration was by no means the oddest thing about this room. On its far side, a group of around 20 people stood expressionless, like soldiers on parade. Rani and Clyde were in the front row. The rest were all ages, shapes and sizes, just random Ealing residents who clicked the wrong internet link and had been taken over by the locusts. Webster barely acknowledged their presence, giving them only the occasional glance. He had more important matters to attend to. Webster was sitting as close to the desk as his stomach, doubtlessly enlarged by countless fast food breakfasts, lunch and dinners, would allow. The desk's surface hadn't been seen for years, thanks to the growing mountain of junk food wrappers, computer parts, and pieces of paper with calculations scribbled all over them. He had a telephone handset in each hand and was holding them a few inches from his ear. The buzz of angry callers made them sound like bees. He said, "Yes, Mr. Stone," into one handset, then "Yes, Miss Parsons," into the other, then spoke to both at the same time. "I know the new computer diagnostic program has been slightly delayed, but don't worry about a thing. The program's ready. I've just been conducting a few—" He smirked to himself, then regained his composure. "Tests, trials, to make sure the software works properly. Apologies for the delay. Please tell everyone to open the attachment the very moment they receive it, or the system might become unbalanced. A brief burst of yelling erupted from each handset before Stone and Parsons each hung up their phones at the other ends. Ian Webster laughed long and hard. Then he spoke to Rani, Clyde and the others. Know what's so funny? I'll tell you what. This is the day that I get even. This is the day that everyone pays. Everyone at this company will dance to my tune. I drove across Ealing as fast as I could. I was keen to find out exactly what this Ian Webster was up to, especially since he now had two of my closest friends under his control. "We've got a way to go yet," Luke said, examining the map which Mr. Smith had printed out for us. "Oh, take a left here." As I followed Luke's directions, my mobile phone rang. I'd hooked it up to my car so that the details of incoming callers were displayed on the dashboard. Luke and I looked at the screen in surprise. The caller's number was flashing on it beneath their name. It was my scientist friend, Celeste Rivers, from the Pharos Institute. "Wow," Luke said. "Do you think Professor Rivers heard about this Webster business?" "I don't know," I said, "but let's find out." I leant forward to press the accept call button, but Luke suddenly stopped me, his hand encircling my wrist. "Don't, Mum," he warned. "It's a trick, just like they tried on Doris and Ollie." I hesitated. "How can you be sure, Luke?" "That's not the professor's number," he said, sending a little chill up my spine. "I remember the real one." Stunned, I pressed the reject call button. I realised that Rani or Clyde must have told this Webster character about Professor Rivers. Very crafty, and I so nearly fell for it. "Luke," I said, "if I wasn't driving, I'd give you the biggest hug in the world." He smiled and shifted awkwardly in his seat. "Maybe later, Mum, if no one's watching." Okay, I said, "but thank you. Now, would you like to hear the plan?" The cheeky devil looked amazed. "There's a plan?" "Yes, of course there is. You think I just barge into a dangerous situation without a plan?" Luke's amused silence said it all. The door to Ian Webster's office creaked open. Two more people entered, just as blank-faced as the other hypnotised folk. They walked across the room and joined the crowd, then stood still. Webster was at his computer keyboard. He smiled broadly, his fingers a blur as he typed. "I'd like to thank you all," he told Rani, Clyde and the others, "for helping me with my test this afternoon. The Ealing results were conclusive. The first half of my plan worked." Rani and Clyde looked on, unable to intervene, as Webster opened a new email message. "Now to try with this entire building," he said. "This email's going to everyone, and when they open the attachment, not one, but 2 locusts will come out and play. I want to make doubly sure no one escapes." Sucking in a big breath, he issued a sound like an aeroplane as he made his forefinger dive towards the send button, moving downwards in ever-decreasing circles. His finger jabbed the button, sending the email off to 500 people's inboxes. "King of the world," he shouted, leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head. The chair squeaked, as if alarmed. "Oh, yeah, King of the world." A voice rang out from behind the wall of alien posters. Webster didn't bat an eyelid. The voice seemed perfectly familiar to him. It was low, but cold and sinister, accompanied by a constant tittering noise. "Has it been done?" it inquired. "All done," Webster said with a laugh. "Oh, I might have to hack into the CCTV feed just to see all their faces." "There is no reason to gloat," the thing behind the wall said. "Gloating is non-productive. Victory will suffice." "Or maybe to you," Webster said with a shrug. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a slice of pizza. "Guess we have slightly different ways of going about stuff." "And yet," said the thing, "our goal is the same." Webster nodded. "Absolutely, to make people pay for what they've done to me." The voice remained silent. Webster took a bite of pizza. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some gloating to do." Turning back to his computer, he hacked into the building's CCTV system, selecting level 5's cameras. Then he cackled at the madness which was unfolding up there. Rani and Clyde also watched the images on his screen, trapped within their own bodies and feeling totally helpless. Like all the floors in their building, Level 5 had an open office layout with 100 workstations for suited employees. Each and every one of these workstations was now transforming. The air rang with screams, electronic beeps, and the ear-piercing screech of ripping metal. Some workers sat at their desks, watching with astonishment as their machines cracked open. Other computers had already broken and discharged locusts, which now chased the machine's former operators across the wide space. People crashed into each other and many were knocked to the floor. Amid the panic and the chaos, few stopped to help anyone else up. Some workers merely stood rooted to the spot like toys without batteries, as more locusts found their targets and wriggled up people's sleeves or down the necks of their shirts. More people adopted the same zombie-like state. The robots were relentless. Even people who managed to escape through fire exits found themselves pursued by the awful creatures. A new arrival wandered into Ian Webster's office. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead of her as she joined the others and stood behind the equally vacant-looking Rani and Clyde. Webster was delightedly flicking through the CCTV feed from each floor. On every level of the building, the story was the same. Webster picked up the 2 phone handsets again and made a call on each, holding the receivers to his head. "Hello, Mr. Stone," he said, clearly enjoying this. "Hello, Mrs. Parsons. Oh, so now you answer your phones to me. Normally, I'm lucky if you answer at all. Well, now that you're under my control, kindly sing nursery rhymes until further notice." Webster listened for a while. Rani and Clyde could faintly hear a male voice singing Humpty Dumpty, while Miss Parsons had opted for The 3 Blind Mice. Webster hung up and punched the air, delighted. Once again, he flicked between the building's various CCTV camera feeds and saw that practically everyone now stood still. A couple of people were still hightailing around the place in an attempt to avoid the locusts, but he looked confident that the robots would get them in the end. Webster patched his terminal into the public address system, allowing him to speak to everyone in the building at the same time. He then donned a headset and adjusted the microphone so that it was close to his mouth. His screen showed level 5 of the building, where about 100 people stood to attention. "Hello, folks," he said. "Good day at the office. I expect you were all watching the clock, thinking about what you were going to have for tea. Well, you won't be leaving tonight. You're all going to do some serious overtime as my slaves. Isn't that right?" 100 people mouthed the same word, which could be heard from above echoing around the entire building. "Yes." "Dance for me," Webster ordered. "All of you." And everyone began to move. They all danced their own particular dance. Some adopted a classic style, such as the waltz, the quick-step, or even the cha-cha-cha. Others engaged in more modern, uninhibited moves. "That's the stuff," Webster said, his voice shot through with resentment. "Oh, the number of times you all phone me day in, day out, asking for my help with some trivial problem. You could have worked it out for yourselves, or at least tried turning the computer off, then on again. But no, you bombarded me until I lost my mind. And when I couldn't wave a magic wand to solve your complaints, you called me every name under the sun." Webster's resentment suddenly gave way to hurt, and his voice faltered slightly. He switched his headset microphone off and took a moment to compose himself. He stared at the screen, which showed employees continuing to dance, and then reactivated his headset mic. "People of Stone and Parsons," he said, his voice thick with contempt once again. "You treated me like I was your puppet. See how the tables are turned. Dance as if your lives depended on it, because, rest assured, they do." Webster flinched as one of the hypnotised people in his own office suddenly spoke. "I can sympathise with how you feel," she said. "Who's that?" Webster yelled. "Why are you talking? Did I order you to talk?" He craned his neck in an attempt to see which puppet had spoken. The voice continued. "It's never nice when people make demands without considering their toll upon you, without giving a little thought to the fact that you're a fellow human being, or even worse, thinking you're somehow inferior to them." Webster really lost his rag now. "Who is talking?" he demanded, sounding like a spoilt child. I stepped out from between Rani and Clyde, smiling at Webster. I had been that last person to enter the room. Knowing that everyone was under the influence of the locusts, I had adopted a blank expression to blend in with the others. I wanted to stand there for a while and get a fix on Webster's motivation, which had soon become pretty clear. For him, this was all about revenge. He stared at me flabbergasted. "How did you escape the locusts' control?" He rapped a big fist on his desk, displacing an empty burger wrapper which drifted down to join the others on the floor. "I was never under it," I said lightly. Webster pointed to either side of me. "Rani, Clyde, hold her still," he commanded. Rani and Clyde lurched into action, each firmly seizing one of my arms. "Is this the Sarah Jane Smith you told me about?" Webster demanded of Clyde and Rani. They nodded. "Oh," Webster said, drumming his fingers together as if trying to ape the supervillains he'd seen in 1,000 movies. "So you, Miss Smith, are one of the few people who avoided my little test this afternoon?" This begged a question. Why choose that particular neighbourhood, my neighbourhood, in which to trial your little pets? "I grew up there," he said with a sneer. Course, I searched his face for a reaction. "Not the greatest experience. Let me guess. Were you bullied? Is that it?" When Webster didn't reply and avoided eye contact, I knew I had my answer. I tipped my head towards the motionless people. "Listen, if you can do all this, imagine what you could achieve for the good. You're ruining your life purely for the sake of revenge." For a moment, it looked as though I'd struck a chord in Webster. Encouraged, I went in for the kill. "So come on, Ian, call off your silly metal insects." Webster's face clouded with outrage. "Silly?" he said. "Silly?" An alarming grin stretched across his face. "Let's see how silly you find this." He theatrically pressed a button on his keyboard. There was a low rumble, and an entire wall of Webster's office, the one covered in pictures of sci-fi aliens, slowly rumbled to the side. I was shocked by what I saw in the chamber behind it. Elsewhere in the Stone and Parsons building, Luke ran up a flight of stairs, taking 2 steps at a time. Having memorised the diagrams presented by Mr. Smith, he knew exactly where he was heading. 10 minutes previously, he and I had walked into reception and instantly gathered that the security staff were controlled by locusts. We mimicked their vacant looks, and they pointed through a set of double doors. "Basement," said one. Once we were through the doors, we'd seen a row of lifts. A quick inspection revealed that Webster had shut them down. Probably, I later reflected, to stop the poor employees from escaping. After a quick hug, Luke and I had parted. He had disappeared up a nearby staircase for the top floor, while I descended. And now he was bursting out through a door on level 3. He just needed to run across a stretch of floor to get to the next part of the staircase. A yellow plastic health and safety sign sat next to a mop and bucket, yet the floor was dry. The caretaker must have fled the building when the locusts appeared. A nearby door swung open, and 2 men in suits darted out to block Luke's path. They had a similar faraway look to those which Rani and Clyde had worn in the attic. "Stop," the 2 of them said together, reaching out for him. Thinking fast, Luke scooped up the bucket and threw the water at them. Shame about the nice suits, but he needed to get to level 5. The pair of them thrashed around, trying to grab Luke, but the now wet floor was causing them to slip and slide. As Luke ran over to the stairs, the two men hit the ground together, landing next to the health and safety sign which read, "Warning, this floor may be slippery." Webster couldn't stop his infuriating smirk as I stared at the thing in the chamber behind his wall. A large, transparent tank occupied most of the space, filled with some kind of grim, bubbling, gloopy green substance. Inside the tank, half submerged in its contents, was a gigantic and almost entirely organic alien, which very much resembled one of Earth's locusts. 12 feet long, from its twitching feelers to its hind legs, it was fluorescent blue with spindly limbs, spiky wings and big black eyes. It also smelt dreadful. As I looked up at it, I made a conscious effort not to appear as unnerved and wrong-footed as I felt. "Hello," I said. "You must be the Humulgus. My computer didn't have files on you." Its voice gave me the creeps.
"Not everything in the universe has been documented. We are a young and hungry race."
"Well, what do you want with Earth?" Before the creature could reply, Webster waved at me sarcastically. "Hello? Keep talking to me, all right? Address the organ grinder, not the monkey." I chuckled at this, which clearly annoyed him. "Oh, I think I can see who the monkey is in this scenario," I said. "Let me guess. The Humulgus appeared one day, perhaps having beamed down from a passing ship. It probably detected that you were a control freak with no self-control."
"No self-control," he said. "How'd you figure that out?"
"From the mess in this room," I retorted, briefly feeling like his mother. Perhaps I should have gone on to tell him to do his homework. "Listen, I sympathise greatly with anyone who gets bullied, but you were chosen for how useful you would be to the Humulgus, not the other way round." I directed my voice towards the thing in the tank. "Am I right?"
"You don't need to answer that,"
Webster told the creature. The huge locust's face remained focused on me.
"You are correct,"
it said. Webster looked crestfallen. "Oh, cheers." The Humulgus turned to face Webster.
"You have been instrumental in devising a method with which to transport replicas of my own form throughout Earth's computer network."
"Those locusts," I said, "I'm guessing they always contain the wireless receivers of the computer they came from, yes? That way you can transmit a signal which controls people."
"That way,"
the Humulgus corrected,
"I shall gain total dominion over this pitifully weak world."
To my surprise, Webster reacted as if this was the first time he'd heard of such a scheme. "What do you mean, total dominion?" he said. I realised how naive Webster had been. Did you seriously think that a sinister alien locust really just wanted to help you get your own back on the people you work for? Really?
"I fed it,"
he said defensively, gesturing towards the junk food wrappers.
"It loved this stuff. All it said it wanted in return was food and more pond water for that tank."
It struck me the mention of pond water explained the awful reek. The Humulgus quivered as it laughed at Webster.
"I simply deceived you. All human beings will serve and feed us. They will become our slaves, transforming this planet into vast kingdoms designed for our luxury. We will rule over everyone, including you."
Webster opened his mouth to reply, but didn't get a chance. The creature's feelers glowed, sending some kind of signal, and the computer casing under Webster's desk tore apart like an overripe fruit.
"No!"
Webster said.
"Not me!"
He rolled his chair backwards, several feet away from his desk, but it was too late. The emerging robot locust had already disappeared up his trouser leg. Within seconds, Webster had stopped his desperate flailing and merely sat upright in his chair. I could feel the heat of the Humulgus's beady eyes upon me.
Sarah Jane Smith. It seems you are an unusually resourceful human being. You potentially stand in our way, therefore you must be consumed. Bring her to me.
Consumed. I remembered Rani's warning from before. You will become one with the Humulgus. It began to dawn on me exactly what she had meant. Clyde and Rani tightened their holds on me, forcefully pulling me inch by inch towards the tank.
Your Earth junk food is delicious,
the creature said, flapping its wings in anticipation.
But humans are even more renowned for their exquisite taste.
This thing wanted to eat me. I struggled and cried out, battling unsuccessfully against Rani and Clyde's grasp as they dragged me towards the creature's gaping maw. 5 levels up, Luke crashed through yet another set of doors and was greatly relieved to find the building's security centre unattended. Perhaps the staff there had evacuated along with the caretaker. So much for security. Wasting no time, he sat in front of the main computer, swiftly working out how it controlled the building. Remembering the hints and tips given to him by Mr. Smith, he set about hacking into the system, navigating his way through various passcodes as quickly as he could. In Webster's office, I was struggling as hard as I could, but Rani and Clyde seemed to be getting stronger. As Webster looked on with a blank expression, we neared the hungry Humulgus. Up close it didn't look any prettier, and I could see the many cells in its compound eyes. I knew that if only Clyde was himself, he'd have called it gross or something very similar.
Return to your desk, the Humulgus told Webster, and send our virus to the entire world.
Yes, Webster said. Of course. He wheeled his chair back into position, opened an email program and began typing at high speed. I tried, but failed to keep the mounting desperation out of my voice. Rani, Clyde, you've got to shake off this thing's influence. Please, try as hard as you possibly can. They both looked at me without so much as a flicker of recognition. I began to wonder if this really was it. After all the adventures I'd had, was I really about to end my days as an alien locust's dinner? I closed my eyes as I smelt the creature's sour breath, a charming combination of pond water and rancid junk food, and prayed that Luke would come through for me. Just when I thought things couldn't get much worse, Webster swung round to face the Humulgus. The virus has been emailed to the entire world, he told it.
Excellent, the creature said. Soon my signal will control every puny mind on this planet.
It opened its mouth wide, inches from my face. Suddenly, alarm sirens sounded throughout the building. A red light flashed on the wall above Webster's desk. The Humulgus quivered. The colour of its entire body changed from blue to bright pink.
Oh, what is happening, Webster?
Webster calmly studied his screen.
Emergency lockdown. All external communication has been cut. The email was not sent.
Luke felt triumphant as the word lockdown flashed on his screen. All of the building's phone lines and transmitters had been instantly shut down. Lead shutters slid across the security centre's windows. On another screen, a real-time 3D diagram showed the building's exterior being entirely covered in the lead panels. Mr. Smith had informed Luke that Stone and Parsons dealt in highly sensitive financial matters across many countries, and so needed this kind of security as a precaution. Luke sat back in his chair and enjoyed the show. I laughed at the Humulgus's face. The whole place is now cocooned in lead, I told it. And in case you didn't know, lead blocks everything from radio broadcasts to radiation. Try getting your emails and signals out now. The world is safe. The Humulgus's two feelers jerked for a few moments. Its pink colour began to return to blue. When it spoke, it sounded unnervingly calm.
Webster, tell your level 5 puppets to storm the security centre, deal with the intruder, and reverse this lockdown.
"No," I cried, struggling against Clyde and Riney with more vigour than ever before. "If they so much as harm a hair on Luke's head—" Webster attached his headset and switched on the microphone to address his minions in the rest of the office block. The very second he did that, I finally managed to break free of Riney and Clyde's grasp. Time seemed to slow down. I reached for my sonic lipstick while they struggled to grab me again. I activated the lipstick and pointed it directly at Webster's headset. As the microphone picked up my sonic blast, a high-pitched whine ripped through the building's entire PA system. Webster tugged his headset off, pained by the loud, shrill sound. On level 5, Luke stuck his fingers in his ears to protect him against the terrible screech which he'd suspected would come. Peering through an internal window down into the office space on the floor below, he saw 100 employees abruptly stop dancing. They blinked, and their personalities returned, but slowly, as if they were awaking from a dream. They sat heavily, exhausted, and one by one, deactivated locusts fell from their clothes. Luke felt like dancing himself with joy. My amplified lipstick had broken the signal for good. The emulgas gyrated wildly, turning from blue to dark pink as it watched everyone in the office, including Webster, regain control of themselves. Riney and Clyde had already released my arms and now blinked at me, confused. "Oh, thank goodness that's over," Riney said. "It was like I was trapped in my own head. I could see and hear everything." She then did a double take when she saw the huge humulgus. Clyde screwed up his face and pinched his nose. "Oh," he said, "that is well gross." I gestured for them to stand back from the humulgus, then turned to confront it. "Well now," I said, "that didn't work so well, did it?" A long pause.
"There will be other opportunities,"
it said. I firmly shook my head. "Not on this planet, there won't."
"There will always be humans who are ready to cooperate,"
the humulgus insisted. Behind me, Webster stood up, unsteady on his feet. "I didn't realise what your full intentions were. If I'd known, I would never have helped you." "So you see," I said, "although you homed in on one of the more disgruntled souls that Earth had to offer, even he still wasn't prepared for the enormity of what you had planned. The vast majority of people on this planet would never allow you to control others. Your mission has failed and will fail each and every time." I walked right up to the humulgus, lowering my voice. "If you're foolish enough to try again," I told it, "I'll be here, waiting. A living, breathing antivirus program." The humulgus screeched and turned bright red, thrashing about in its tank and churning the vile pond water. To me, it looked like a tantrum. Then a loud crackle made me jump back from the creature. A white glow encapsulated the humulgus, and it vanished with a whoosh, leaving only the tank sloshing away. Webster was the first to speak. Where is it gone?" I glanced his way. "Back to its ship, I expect. Hopefully to tell its friends to scratch Earth from their list of possible colonies." So what happens now?" Webster asked. "To me?" "That's a police matter," I told him. Yes, Webster may have redeemed himself at the last minute, but after the amount of mayhem he'd caused, there was no way I could let him walk free. He was already eyeing the exit, but thankfully some of the newly revived inhabitants of Ealing were blocking his escape route. Luke dashed into the office out of breath, rejoining Riney, Clyde and I. He looked disappointed by the empty tank. "Has the alien gone?" he said. "Now I'll never know what it looked like." "It was a bit like the robot locusts," Riney said with a shudder. "Only way bigger, fleshier and, smellier." Clyde playfully ruffled Luke's hair and pointed at the tank. "There you go. Bath time." When the police arrived to arrest Ian Webster, they thankfully seemed oblivious of the alien aspect of the invasion which he had masterminded. As far as they were concerned, he was just another computer virus criminal. Luke, Rani and Clyde all spoke at once, eager to tell me all about their own experiences in this disturbing affair. By the time I drove us all away from the Stone and Parsons building, my head was spinning. It was only 7:30 in the evening, but we were exhausted. Rani and Clyde were practically asleep in the back of my car, arguably having suffered the worst of it all. Well, apart from me being almost eaten by the emulgus, I suppose. As we neared home, the first few snowflakes of the year began drifting down onto the windscreen of my car. They felt like a reward. I was also dearly looking forward to getting the kettle on and then making us all some well-earned supper. Suddenly, Luke pointed out through the front passenger window. "Look," he said, pointing at the field as we neared our home. "There's that boy, Ollie." Sure enough, there was Ollie playing football with his friends. Further along, on the other side of the street, I spied Doris walking into the local hall. Outside, a big chalkboard sign read, "Tonight, over 60s speed dating." I joined Luke in smiling warmly at the sight. "Would you look at those two?" I said. "It just goes to show, some things are far better done offline." The Sarah Jane Adventures. Deadly Download was written by Jason Arnopp and read by Elisabeth Sladen. It was produced by Neil Gardner.